welcome you here today. My name is LauraTKelso, and I'm an associate broker for a company called NextHome Champions. This happens to be my broker, Tom Smolinski, who is going to be one of our speakers today. But I am just so happy to have all of you here today. As many of you know, this has been going on since 2019 with a little bit of a break with COVID in there that was a little crazy for all of us. But many of you who have been coming for quite some time, I talk about that concept of what is it to be a savvy senior. So this part is going to require some audience participation, okay? So who can tell me one of the aspects of that concept of being a savvy senior? There's a lot of ways, but there's really 4 specific ones that I talk about all the time. 4. Financially. Okay, so financially means that regardless of your level of wealth, that you've sat down with a financial planner or a trusted person and discussed that and what that looks like for the future. So you don't have to be rich to do financial planning. So that's awesome. That's 1. What are the other 3? Legal, you bet. Cheryl mentioned legal. So as we become adults, really anything over 18, it makes sense to have some version of a legal plan. This might be as simple as a very simple will. As we get older, it might make sense to have a trust. It might make sense to have some powers of attorney in place for both durable medical powers of attorney and also other versions of powers of attorney. And even if you don't need that, I just recommend sitting down with someone who will look at your personal picture and determine what things might make sense for you. So those are 2. So legal and financial. What else? What are we talking about today? Real estate. Exactly. So being a savvy senior in regards to real estate simply means that you have taken some time to think about and evaluate your current home, you have an idea on the value, and you've thought about what your needs might be for the future in the off chance you had to move, even if you're not planning on it. Okay, so that's the real estate picture, and we're definitely going to be digging into that today. What's the last one? This has to do with your stuff. You've downsized. Okay, now this doesn't mean you've moved. This simply means that you have begun the process of downsizing your items to the point where your current home is safe to live and free of clutter to the point where if something changed in your situation and you had to move, one of your children would not be taking a leave of absence from their jobs to help you do that, okay? Because that's a lot of work, I'm telling you. So, okay. So that's pretty much it. Those 4 areas are kind of, and there's of course a lot more, but those are the basics of really what it is to be quote unquote savvy. So today I'm going to encourage you to look at something in your house a little bit differently than you may have in the past. So I'm going to guess that many of you in the audience have some retirement accounts that you have out there and that you're planning that those will take care of you someday. Which is awesome. Now, I will say that I often meet quite a few seniors that, life has happened, and maybe they don't have a lot of extra accounts. Maybe their home is really their primary asset, and they're going to be relying on that for their care at some point. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to actually kind of make a comparison between those retirement accounts and your home, okay? I want you to think of your home as you would like your 401k, all right? So you may not be moving anytime soon. You may have no desire to move or no plan to move. And so it's very easy to think, well, why on earth do I care what my house is worth? Well, the reason that you might care is because as we grow older, and it doesn't necessarily mean, senior, there's no specific age, but it becomes more likely that things happen in our lives that make it necessary for us to move. It might be a divorce. It could be the passing of a spouse. It could be, something changing in our health where all of a sudden this is something that we did not plan on, but that our house is no longer a sensible place for us to live. I meet seniors, unfortunately, all the time that have to move for a variety of reasons that they truly had no intention of moving. They had no desire, they had no plan, and that makes it much, much harder. So simply by having the knowledge of the current real estate market, what your house looks like in the current real estate market, it's nothing more than a planning tool. Because one of the things that, with 401ks and accounts, we often have an idea of when we're going to actually tap into those, when we're going to start to use those. And the difference is with your house, if you're forced to move all of a sudden and you didn't plan on it, that's entirely different. And at that point, it's going to make sense that you know how much your house is worth. So with all that, we're going to dig in, and you guys are going to be real estate experts by the time you leave today. This presentation is going on YouTube, so if you miss it or have family or friends that would like to watch it, they can absolutely go back and watch it after the fact, so that's really helpful. I want to say a huge thank you to my various educational partners that both support me, through donations and being on the website, and the ones that are in this room. I encourage you to get to know them and what they do if you need their services or know someone else, because I could not put on this really quality thing without their help. And of course, all the other helpers the people that Jenny and Mary Jo that helped me set up and check you guys in and all that. There's just so many people that pour into this so that you guys can get smarter every month, and I really, really appreciate that. Couple of final little notes. So as you know, I never have anyone reach out to you unless you request it. That's a very important thing to me. But how do you get in touch with people if you want more information? One is the handout and the note-taking sheet. Our speakers up here that are just a wealth of information. All of their information and contact info is on here. You can also, on the feedback sheet that's somewhere in my pile, you can request that you be contacted by them. So especially, too, if you have a question that is more personal in nature, please try and keep your questions really general if possible, because it's going to be much easier for these guys to dig into your situation and give you a more accurate answer by talking with them one-on-one. So you can either talk with them after the fact today, or simply mark on here that, hey, I'd really love to have Tom, Blaine, or Jenny give me a call after the fact and hear a little bit more about what's going on. You can also sign up for the future presentations right on here. Please continue to do that. I know whether I get those RSVPs in the mail or through here or through you guys calling me or texting me, I try and keep up on that. If I ever miss it and don't have somebody signed up or a name tag, I apologize. It's kind of a never-ending battle to keep up with that, but I'm truly trying my best on that. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to first go down the line and let each of these guys introduce themselves with a couple of sentences, and then we'll hop into the questions.
You want me to go first?
You bet.
Okay. I'm Tom Smolinski. I am the broker-owner of NextHome Champions. Some of you may have met my wife. She's an optometrist, and she works at the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Blaine Feyen. I'm the owner of Real Value Appraisal Group, so I'm the real estate appraiser in the group.
I'm Jenny Wagner. Nice to see you guys again. I had a lot of familiar faces. I've been helping Laura for a couple months now. I'm with Treadstone Mortgage. I've been in the mortgage business over 25 years, so lots to share with you today. Welcome.
Okay, so we're going to hop into the questions. We're going to go ahead and start with Tom. So Tom, you've not only been a big supporter of this series, but you're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to real estate. So there's so much noise going on in the media right now today. I feel like it can be very, very challenging to know what to believe in regard to this subject. So with that concept of comparing our homes to our 401k accounts, let's talk about the rates that homes have appreciated in the last few years and what is happening currently with the value of homes.
Wow, that's a big question. All right, so who in here has ever listened to any of the media since, say, January? Oh, okay. So it's all doom and gloom, right? They want you to come back. They want you to, if you're online, they want you to keep clicking. And, we've heard a lot lately about recession, right? We've heard that word. And there is a recession going on out on the East and West Coast. When COVID happened, they had a lot of people, sent to work from home, right? So all of these people went home to work, and they don't really want to come home or go back to the office to work. And I think that's had an impact in the East and West Coast, where it's so expensive to own a home. These folks have moved back to middle America, and they're working from their homes out there. And so I believe that's had a huge impact on the East and West Coast, and I do believe there is a recession going on out there. But here, home values are strong, like super strong. So right here in Kent County, over the last 5 years, we've seen huge gains, right? Better than what you've seen in the stock market, your 401ks, your IRAs, all of that stuff. So between 18 and 19, home values increased 11%. That's huge. Between 19 and 20, another 11%. Between 20 and 21, it only went up 10%, which is still a huge number. Between 21 and 22, it went up 16%. That's the average home value right here in Kent County. And then this last year, between January 22 and January of 23, it went up another 12%. So that's the average home value. So everybody asks me, how's the market doing? Well, the answer is going to be different if you're out on the East and West Coast or if you're right here in West Michigan. And real estate is local. It depends on the type of home you're living in. It depends on the neighborhood you're living in. Depends on the school system and everything else. But we've seen double-digit gains. We have seen, 11, 10, 16, and we're down to 12 this last year, but that's still an increase. If you listen to the media or whatever, they're like, oh, we're in a declining market. No, homes are still improving, right? They're still appreciating. And I expect the same this year. There's such a demand for housing right here in West Michigan that I don't see them losing value for quite a while.
Great, thank you. So one of the things when I actually talk with people who are a little more serious about thinking about selling their homes, we always start by doing a full evaluation of their home because it is very, very specific. And one of the things that we do is we go over all of the different costs that are associated with selling their home. And so, a lot of people tend to think before they meet with me is that, well, gosh, if I sell my home for $300,000, I'm going to walk away with $300,000 less 6% because that's what realtors cost, and realtors are the expensive part of selling my home. Well, we're not really we're a portion of it, but we're most certainly not the only portion of it. And so I think it's important for you to really understand that. So one of the things that we've handed out today is I took some time to show you a variety of all of the costs that go along with selling a typical home. So I want Tom to elaborate on those and just what to expect when you sell a home, because really, to me, power is in being just fully educated and more familiar with what that process looks like.
Can I see the net sheet?
Of course.
Hey, that looks familiar. So when we're talking about the costs associated with selling your home and you're trying to figure that out, right? So because we work at the same company, we are allowed to talk about commission, okay? And typically, right, the real estate commission is about 6%, right? It depends on the house or whether it's a piece of property or whether it's a commercial building, but we're talking about residential homes now. And for the most part, it's typically 6%. Out of that 6%, half of that, typically 3%, goes to the agent that's listing or marketing your home. The other 3% goes to whatever whatever realtor brings a buyer. The other costs associated that you see here are like transfer tax, revenue stamps. Uncle Sam always gets paid no matter what, right? In addition to that, there's title insurance. When you buy a home, you want to make sure that there's free and clear title when you buy that, which means there isn't, any other liens or loans on that property when you get it. And a buyer for your home is going to want the same exact thing. So although the real estate commission is 6%, a lot of those other fees add up to right around 2%. So if you take what your home is valued at and subtract 8%, that really gets you in the ballpark. And again, it's not the realtor, taking 6% or whatever. The realtor that you hire to do a good job for you is getting paid to market your home.
And of course, we all work under brokers, unless I wanted to start my own brokerage. So this wonderful gentleman, for all the support that he does give me and all the things that he pays for, also gets a portion of that. So when you look at, a lot of people think like, oh, you're getting 3% for the sale of that home. Well, I'm not walking away with anything close to 3%. There's a tremendous amount of costs that go along with that. So it's just good to kind of have a better idea of, what that really looks like. All right, so with the increase in equity in people's homes and the number of buyers for those homes, I've found that some sellers, really think, well, what's the realtor doing for me? Isn't your job to find a buyer? Can you talk about what the most important, some of the sellers are considering that idea of not using a realtor. So if you can talk about some of the most important qualities of a realtor, what offerings are most important in the realtor they choose, and then sellers who might think, well, all realtors are just the same. I've got a cousin who sold real estate a number of years ago. I'm going to have them sell my home. Or I've got someone from church. I'm going to have them sell my home. If you can kind of speak to that concept of really how important it is to choose the right person.
Was there one question there, or was there like 7?
Oh, there was 7. Go ahead. You know them all.
Oh, my goodness. I'll try and remember and walk through them all, right? So how many people here know a realtor that's not LauraTKelso? Anybody? Okay. So
how many of you know 12?
All realtors are not created equal, right? They're not. How many people here have had a steak, right? If you've had a steak at a really nice restaurant like Ruth's Chris or something like that, right? I'd like to compare that to having a steak at Brand's. Now, there's nothing wrong with Brand's. It's a $10 steak, right? There's some value there. However, right, when you have a steak at Ruth's Chris, like, there's a ton of difference. The difference is massive. And you think, oh, well, it's just a cow. It's just a piece of steak, right? How that cow was raised has something to do with it. How it was butchered and processed has something to do with it. How long it was aged has something to do with it. What that chef does with that steak to season it, how they cook it, has a lot to do with it. And so when you compare a steak to Ruth's Chris and a steak from Brand's, the difference is massive. And I think we all agreed to that, right? And the same is true when it comes to choosing a realtor. So whether a realtor is going to list and market your home properly has a lot to do with how quickly it sells and how much money you get at closing. So whether a realtor is going to use professional photography is a huge difference, because 87% of all home buyers make a decision based on photography. 87%. So professional photography is huge. If you've ever been on Zillow and you see a realtor in the bathroom mirror with a cell phone taking pictures of the house, it's a big difference than having a professional photographer. Not to mention having aerial photography, right? Somebody that flies a drone up there and can get a picture of the lake in your backyard, the woods, the cul-de-sac you're on. All of those things are important to a buyer. Let's see here. Virtual reality is another thing. Have you ever been online and walked through a house like at your leisure? It's huge, right? When you can walk into the kitchen, look down at the countertops, and even see if somebody has left dirty dishes in it, right? That's a really powerful tool that some realtors use, and I know Laura uses it all the time as well. But the reason we use it is because homes sell for 4 to 9% higher when they're marketed and advertised with virtual reality. And that's a huge, huge difference, right? And you don't see that on every listing, do you? Nope. All realtors aren't created equal. Video is another one. When a realtor like Laura walks through your home, right, and shows people just a walkthrough of your home, a video is 1,200% more likely to be shared on social media than without video. 1,200%. That's a massive difference. So if you're considering a different realtor, like your niece or your nephew or your grandkid or somebody you know from church, make sure you find out what exactly they're going to do to achieve your goals, because they're not all created equal. This one over here does a really good job. So staging, again, that's a very specific question. It depends on the house, right? Some homes are a lot better when they're staged, and some homes, quite frankly, they don't need it. It entirely depends on the home, how much furniture you have, how much clutter is in there, and the price point of the home, the neighborhood, which municipality it's in. It really is an individual question.
Yep. The only other thing that I'd want to address on that is that I find that the most common thought out there is that a realtor's job is to find a buyer for your house. Okay? That is truly far from the truth, because especially in this market over the past few years, there have been more than enough buyers for every house. Many of you, we'll talk about this at a different time, but are likely getting letters in the mail saying, I have a buyer for your house, I have a buyer for your house. Yeah, finding a buyer is not the problem. Finding a qualified buyer who will pay the highest price and who will get to the end of the transaction and not sue you afterwards is the key to a successful real estate transaction. And that is two entirely different things. And so, our job is not only to find a buyer, but to vet that buyer and to manage the transaction with all of our professionalism and knowledge to get you to the end successfully.
Is that a question?
Nope. Next question. That was a comment. Okay, so the market is still really good, and we're not seeing, the market is still really good, we're not seeing the same number of buyers that we did in these last couple of years compete for homes due to the rise in interest rates that Jenny will be addressing in a little bit. So it just means that instead of seeing 20 competing offers or 10 competing offers, we might have 3 competing offers. Maybe we only get 1 offer on your home. It just all depends. So what that really means is that sellers are forced to actually work a little bit again. We're forced to have you prep your homes with our help so that it is the most desirable place it can possibly be for buyers. So Tom, if you can address, what are some of the things that you recommend that every single seller do to prepare their home for market to give them the best possible chance of getting the highest price?
Hire her and do every single thing she tells you to do. Because it is very specific. It depends on the home. You definitely want the outside to look nice, right? Curb appeal, first impressions are everything. So that is a big deal. But having a marketing plan is really important too, right? Understanding where you're pricing it in terms of whether you're pricing it at the higher end or the lower end of the expected price range, that definitely has an impact too. You definitely want to declutter your home, hide all of your valuables and everything else. you maybe want to organize your closets in your basement, in your storage rooms, in your garage. All of those things make a difference.
A lot of times too, like taking care of deferred maintenance, anything major. Just really the cheapest remodel of all that I always talk about is that idea of cleaning like the queen was coming to tea, decluttering, and then possibly paint. I have a lot of, and it doesn't matter the color. Fresh, clean, and neutral and decluttered is what we're really going for. Everything else is fluff on top. So, okay, last question. So I feel like many people think that they should only reach out to their realtor if they're thinking of buying and selling. Not true. So going back to that concept of understanding the value of your home, even if you have no intention of moving, what are some of the best practices that homeowners can expect from their real estate professionals to help them stay in the know about their home values?
Probably coming up with a value, right? That's especially if we're looking at it in terms of the concept of it being part of our retirement plan or our investment portfolio, right? Knowing where you stand in terms of the value of your home is definitely an important thing that a realtor can help with. I am not an appraiser, but appraisals typically look at past data and not necessarily current or future data. And that's one of the things that a realtor is good for. And appraisers, again, right, typically look at averages, where a realtor that walks through your home can actually look at specifics, right? Everybody's gone to Zillow.com and found what your Zestimate is, right? Well, nobody from Zillow has ever been in your home. And last week, I actually got to meet somebody from Zillow, and they said the same exact thing. We've never been in a home. It's a best guess. But Zillow looks at every single house like it's just a box. And we all have different things in that box that bring value. And having a real estate professional like Laura go through your home and give you an idea of what your home is worth is better than just guessing what your box is worth.
You bet. Yep. And then another thing too, and that's kind of not just for real estate, but for all the professionals that I tend to bring in here. Don't reach out to us just when you think you're going to buy something from us. We are a wealth of information and also a wealth of referrals. So I just tell people, hey, if you've got a need, give me a call. I likely know somebody who can help you, even if it's not me. So that's a huge part too, because all of the professionals that I deal with are happy to help people, even if it has nothing to do with them personally getting business. So, all right, well, thanks, Tom. With that, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna transition on to Blaine. And Blaine is the founder of the Real Value Group. Hi, Blaine.
Good morning.
So I love that when you visit Blaine's website, he talks about his company being an education company that just happens to provide appraisals. So I think that's phenomenal. And honestly, that's exactly how I feel about real estate. And can you share a bit about how you developed your philosophy and why it is critical for people to be knowledgeable about their homes, even if they aren't selling?
Yeah, great question. First, Laura, thanks for having me. Thank you all for being here, taking your valuable time to become so savvy. I changed my philosophy about appraising homes back in 08, 09. Everybody here knows what happened in 08, 09 when it comes to real estate. And the real estate market was decimated. Appraisal fees were cut in half. The whole process changed. Basically, every method I used to get and keep good business, which was relationship-based, was taken away from us. Everything was now just a name and a number and a rotation. And I was ready to leave the business. So I sat down and did some strategic planning, and I asked myself a question: what would keep me in this business? What do I enjoy doing? And it was education. And I said, well, if I could revamp everything in my business and do what I love doing, which is educating while also doing appraisal. And so that's how I came to that. And it's what's kept me in the business and loving it, is doing things like this. Being basically a bridge between my industry and everything else, the public, other industries, that kind of thing.
And that's huge. And honestly, I think of the phrase elevating the industry. And the people that I work with, we work to elevate our industries because, like Tom said, not every realtor is the same, not every appraiser is the same, not every loan officer is the same. You guys deserve to work with quality professionals that will serve you at the highest level and don't settle for anything less. So, all right, so Blaine, I'm going to have you talk a little bit more about Zillow. So I often have people tell me what Zillow says their home is worth. I don't even know what Zillow says my own home is worth, because frankly, it doesn't matter. So can you explain both the benefits of Zillow and also the limitation of Zillow and similar sites?
Yeah, great question. So Zillow, nobody really knows the secret sauce of Zillow. They keep that the technical side of things, their algorithm as they call it, they keep that very secret. As we know from last year, they had a home buying program where they bought thousands and thousands of houses sight unseen, and then they basically tried to sell them. They closed that division down about a year after they started. They lost $500 million because their own algorithm couldn't even figure out the values. It was reported 3 years ago that the CEO, Spencer Raskoff, Zillow had his house, it was off by 37%. It was off by $1 million. So the good and the bad of Zillow is Zillow really is just an algorithm, and sometimes the algorithm is right on, spot on. I mean, I've seen it before where we've appraised a house, we look at Zillow and I agree, within 1%, which in the real estate world is really, really close. And then the funny thing is the next day, it could be off 30% because their algorithm is constantly scraping data from assessors, from MLS, and something could throw it off the next day. So a house that's valued at, say, $300,000, you look at it and you go, wow, Zillow nailed it. And then you look the next day and it says $250,000. And you go, has the market changed that much since yesterday? No, but the algorithm did. It scraped some data from somewhere that threw off the algorithm. And of course, when it comes to trust and transparency, if you can't trust on any given day that the number is correct, that's where kind of they lose. We look and we go, well, I know it could be good, but I also know it could be really, really bad. Which day is it? That's the downside of Zillow. Now, I will say, in all transparency, as appraisers, we use Zillow because Zillow does have a bunch of other tools. We can do an aerial view of a neighborhood, for example, and see all the home prices within that neighborhood. So we can kind of see different areas, what is the average, what's the median home price. We can also see when it comes to, say, for sale by owner, selling your house on your own. Sometimes we're looking for good comparable sale data, and it might not be located in the local listing service that Tom would use, Tom and Laura, because somebody sold their house on their own. But a lot of times they listed their house with Zillow. They posted it on there, and so we can find really good data, and we can find pictures of the interior of the home using Zillow. So that's one of the benefits for us of that service. But I would say just on any given day, you just never know where the value is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been huge increases in technology over the last few years. Once upon a time, buyers and sellers truly needed realtors, and in that sense, they were the gatekeepers of the information. And we kind of, from what I hear, I wasn't a realtor back then, but they really enjoyed being the gatekeepers of that information. You guys absolutely couldn't do anything on your own. Well, now, buyers and sellers are so smart. I mean, people come to me and they've already got a great idea of exactly what they want, and here's 3 houses that I looked at that, I would have bought if they were right. And so there are a lot of reasons that some of these sites can be very, very helpful and great places to start. It's just helpful to have somebody who can then further decipher that information, and especially when it comes to your own personal house. So, Blaine, I know there's a bunch of reasons that people would get appraisals that have nothing to do with actually buying or selling a house. So talk about some of those situations where it makes sense for that.
Yeah, great question. So we do a lot of what we call non-lending appraisals, which would be anything not associated with a refinance or a purchase. Of course, that would fall in the category of people setting up an estate, for example, and you need to know the value of the assets going into the estate. settling a trust, closing out the estate, essentially. We call those, sadly, date of death appraisals, but where we have to evaluate the value of that asset on the date of death of the owner, the primary person in the trust. Pre-listing. Sometimes agents will want either it might be a complex or unique property, and the agent says, look, I'd rather have you look at it and do a pre-listing appraisal for us so we can get a rough value. Sometimes it's that the agent just wants a third party, an unbiased, objective third party, so that they can go in and talk to the homeowner and say, look, we've had a third party do it, so it's not me, the agent, telling you what your home is worth. There's of course, divorce appraisals and things like that. So a whole variety of uses for an appraisal.
Yeah, I often do that on properties that I would call more unique properties. And I tell my sellers, hey, if the appraisal comes out good and he can back up that information, we might just actually share that right on the listing. If that information, if those numbers don't come out favorable to our marketing, we simply don't share and we keep it between us. So, and let the market do its thing. So, Blaine, can you talk about the major steps that would go into a typical appraisal and how what you do actually varies from the competitive market analysis that would be provided by myself and most realtors?
Yeah, sure. So the first part, what the major components of getting an appraisal done? A full appraisal. There's lots of kind of call them new products coming out these days where we, many cases, don't even need to visit the house. There's lots of technology built into almost everybody's phone that will allow you to do some of the work. But a full appraisal, typically an appraiser will come out to the house. And we always recommend it's probably not the full extent of what Tom or Laura might have you do, staging your house and all that. We don't need it staged. We get that people live in their homes. Obviously, cleaning it up, decluttering a little bit so that we can walk through. We're looking at the condition and the quality of all the components of the house. We're, of course, sketching the house, and so that you know the exact square footage of the main levels and the upper levels and any finished area below grade. We're just basically getting a sense of the exterior, the interior, the condition, the quality, any updates, any remodeling, any special features, those kinds of things that might contribute to the value that typical buyers and typical markets would either want to see or maybe discount the house if it's not there. That's the major components. The differences you asked between what an agent does and what an appraiser does. Many times people will call us, people like you, they'll call us and they'll say, hey, we want to have an appraisal done. We always ask, what do you need the appraisal for? You know, what all is it about? So we can give you the best advice on which product you need and how we can help. And I would say probably 50% of the time or more, we actually tell people, you know, the thing you may want to do is call a good real estate agent first, because Laura or Tom can come out and do what's called a CMA, a market analysis for you. And it sounds like that's all you need, and most agents don't charge to do that. So the biggest difference between, say, a market analysis and what an appraiser does, the reason you would call an appraiser is either when you want a legal document, and also maybe an appraiser might go a little bit deeper and a little more scientific on adjusting for the differences in all the comparable sales for all the different components. You have an in-ground pool, a comparable sale doesn't have an in-ground pool. An appraiser has a bunch of tools available to him to extract from the market the adjustment for that pool, where the agent doesn't always have those tools available, and so they might guess. But quite often, they can get really, really close. So it's usually maybe legal purposes, you just want that document that the appraisal will give you.
Yeah, I tend to tell clients that an appraisal is a little bit more mathematical, like he's saying, statistical. You're using very specific things. When I've tried to do what Blaine does in terms of adding specific values or taking them away for things, I get really confused. So it's good, you know, just like any of you, I need my experts in different areas that are truly experts in, you know, what they do that is on the fringes of real estate, but not exactly what I do.
Well, yeah, and if I can say, Laura, one of the biggest differences, too, with an appraisal, Tom said it, appraisals are backward looking. Because we use comparable sales that have already sold and closed, even if backward looking is just yesterday or up to a year ago, it's always looking backward. We're never looking forward and guesstimating what your house could sell for. That's one of the big differences between an appraisal and an agent, is appraisals are appraising on what's called market value, which is the most probable price in a market, not what you could sell your house for or what one buyer would pay for your house, but what the total market of buyers of similar homes in your neighborhood have paid for similar houses. So where I can tell you what happened yesterday up to 2 years ago and what the most probable price is, what agents are really good at is telling you what things can sell for in this market, if that makes
It does.
Makes sense.
It does. And marketing plays into that quite a bit, and even things like interest rates, so we'll talk about in a little bit. So, Blaine, what are some of the things that have the greatest impact in adding value to a home? And is it possible that two next-door neighbors could legitimately have completely different appraisal values, even if their homes are similar size and style?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second question first because it will give us answers to the first question. Is it possible that two neighbors with the exact same house could have different opinions of value from an appraisal standpoint? And the answer is a hearty yes, of course. And it's because the market prefers certain things. It will either pay a premium for certain things or it will discount. We all know from our own personal behavior, by the way, that when we discount something, we tend to discount more than the distance we would pay a premium for something. So where somebody might pay a 10% premium to have granite countertops, they will discount your house 15% if there aren't granite countertops. Does that make sense? It's just natural human behavior. Because not only do we discount the cost of not having those granite countertops, we add in a hassle factor. Now I have to put them in. You're making me put them in, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, so I'm going to discount you even further. So that's where two houses that could be almost exactly the same might have different opinions of value. It has to do with the updating, the remodeling, all the things that could be done. Now the first question, what are the things that add the most value? This is a real common question, and it's almost a little bit of a myth, for example. Every year, twice a year, NAR, the National Association of Realtors, puts out a magazine, and the cover of the magazine is what adds the most value to a house. And then inside they will have statistics and they will have actual percentages. Remodeling your kitchen recovers 56% of the value, and it raises the value of your home this much. Well, how could they possibly know that? As Tom said, every market is different. Real estate is all local. We tend to use the term market with a little m, meaning submarket. Submarket could be just your street, could be a very specific market. We know streets in East Grand Rapids. We know streets in the Northview School District where people want to be on that street. It could be a neighborhood or a development. It could be a gated community. It could be just a school system. But every market is specific, and buyers in every one of those markets prefer specific things. Some of it's general. Yeah, we want to have a pool. But some of it is very specific to that market. And so the answer to that question is more nuanced. What adds value in a 800 square foot house in Wyoming might not be the same thing that adds value to a 5,000 square foot house in Ada. Mm-hmm. It's vastly different. And so the real answer is it's important to know what is important to buyers of homes in your specific little m market. What are your neighbors doing? How are they updating and upgrading their houses? Is your house at the top end of those updates and remodel, or is it lacking behind some of those? So appraisers will typically never give you a straight answer, as you can tell, on that topic. Because I can't tell you. If you remodel your kitchen, I can't tell you. Will you get your money back? I don't know. Probably what I will ask is, if you remodel your kitchen, are you bringing it up to the standards of the rest of the houses in the neighborhood, or are you exceeding them? If you exceed them, your house may command a premium by buyers in the market. Will that premium cover your dollar for dollar input on the kitchen remodel? Very, very hard to say. Buyers are fickle. So it just really depends.
Yep. No, you've done a great job of dodging that question, Blaine. Thank you.
I'm a master at it.
No, and even things like pools, for instance, that would be a great question. So sometimes I'll have a seller that has a pool, like, well, how much value does this add? Well, it doesn't necessarily always add value because you've then got a different pool, excuse the thing there, but of buyers that are going to buy or look at your house, because some people are specifically looking for a home with a pool. Some people would absolutely not buy your home because it has a pool. So that, it doesn't always add value. It only adds value to the buyers who are specifically looking for that aspect of your house that you're adding. And then in that same respect, it really depends on the condition of everything. So maybe you have a pool, but it's a little bit more like a swamp. So you haven't used it, 10 years ago, your grandkids were out there on a regular basis, and now not so much. So you're like, well, I think the pump works, and I think this is good, but I think it might need a new liner. I mean, all of those things are going to make a huge, huge difference. So, all right, so we talked a little bit about buyers in the market. So I know that many of you guys are literally bombarded on a regular basis with people who do say that they want to buy your home. So, Blaine, from your point of view, what would you tell somebody that is getting 17 letters from the I Buy Ugly Houses guy as to, does this make sense for homeowners? And if so, which homeowners would that be?
Well, obviously, the advice would be if you are getting those and you have an interest you've been thinking of, just what you started the reason you're having all this is you call the pros that you know. You call up, I personally would call up my trusted agent as well. Because the agent is in the market, they're in the trenches every single day. They know what's going on. They know buyer preferences, seller preferences. So the first thing I would always say is call your most trusted agent. Second, right after that, if you can't get a hold of your most trusted agent, would be to call your most trusted lender, because they're in touch always with the most trusted realtors, and they know that market data all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Yeah, I think that it does. I think that there are certainly buyers, and honestly, I've had clients where those types of cash transactions, selling to a cash home buyer, some of them are very reputable companies, and sometimes families could have situations where it's like an easy button, and that might actually make sense for you. And I am always encouraging people to simply look at your options, whether it be a cash home buyer, whether it be selling it on the market with a real estate agent as is, whether it might be selling with a real estate agent by doing a few little updates. The important thing is that you have the knowledge of what the difference in your walkaway numbers are going to be based on that decision, so that you're making an informed decision. I find that some of the people that go with the cash home buyers don't truly understand that had they done a few little things that cost them relatively little money, they could have walked away with $30,000 more. It's really important for you guys to understand those differences. So, okay, awesome. Well, I'm going to move on to Jenny. So we're going to start this with kind of a brief explanation of just the cyclical aspect of both real estate and interest rates, and how the two of those work together over time to make it easier or more challenging for buyers to purchase a home, and how that translates back to you if you're selling.
So I think most people in this room have seen cyclical interest rate changes in their life, probably owned homes with different interest rates. Can I see by a raise of hands, has anybody in this room had an interest rate over 12% on a home that they owned? 12%. Anybody had an interest rate over, say, 14 or 15%? Anybody? Okay. So when I first got into the business, we were still reeling from the 80s. It was all the 80s talk, right? So I got into mortgage mid-90s, and it didn't mean anything to me. I was a brand new homeowner. I think I was at 8%, but everybody was talking about, you remember when you had 17%? Which sounded horrible, and 8% sounded so great. And so I've been in the business over 25 years. I'm sure you all have had professions for years and years, and it's definitely does this, just like the economy. We go with the economy. So, the 6% are not scary, and we've kind of been wavering between 6 and 7% over the last few weeks. It's been a very volatile 9 months, a more volatile 9 months than, honestly, the past almost 10 years. So it's been a really steady, recent 10 years. All of those were kind of the 10 years before that. So, we're not at 3s, but we hardly have ever been at 3s in my 25 years in the job. It's hardest for the first-time home buyers because they don't understand why they're getting 3 and why their buying power has been diminished. 6, 7, 8% is a perfectly normal interest rate to pay for a home, but it absolutely does diminish your buying power. You know, this time last year, if I had a borrower pre-qualified at $225,000, now they're looking at maybe $180,000. And it was really hard to find $225,000 last year. It's incredibly hard to find $180,000 now. Those sales prices just are kind of gone. We wish there was a lot more to sell in that price range. So generally speaking, when we, our industry changes in eighths or 0.125. So I might have a 6% rate today. I might have a 6.125 or 6 1/8. About an eighth of an interest rate costs about $15 a month. Or you could say it's about $30 for every quarter point that an interest rate moves. Whether that's up or down, you have $30 less or more buying power for every quarter. So, for those of us who back in the day had a 15% interest rate, you can only buy as much house as you can with a 15% interest rate. But the housing discrepancies weren't so big back then. You maybe made $8 an hour, and you could buy a $60,000 house with that. There's such a big discrepancy now, so moving those interest rates can be really detrimental for people losing buying power.
Yeah, it makes a big difference because most of the time people are really buying not exactly on price, they're really buying on what they can afford in terms of a monthly payment, and that's how that translates back to all of a sudden the interest rate changed, and when they once upon a time could afford $250,000, now all of a sudden they can only afford $200,000. So now we hear so much doom and gloom in the media once again. I know we've talked about that before. So what are you seeing now? If you can talk a little bit more about, we kind of already covered this, just in terms of the 6 and 7 that we're seeing now compared to those historic interest rates, and anything that you can, in terms of what you're hearing now about what the interest rate might be doing over the next year, if you can kind of speak to that too.
So the doom and gloom, I think, it hits all of us as an industry, real estate in general, but for lenders, it really hits us because when it's being portrayed that you lost your buying power, that sounds terrible. Like, wait, I didn't have that much to begin with and I lost some more. Like, it's really hard as a lender to be optimistic about rate increases. Obviously, it's hard on our industry. It's hard on my profession. It stinks. So really, monthly payment is the critical piece right now, and it is. I mean, we've owned homes at 14, 8, 10%, and we could afford the payment. Well, guess what? You still can. So really spinning it, especially for inexperienced buyers, on let's just talk about what that looks like per month. Let's really break down. My job is budget, basically, right? What you can afford. So spinning that doom and gloom is probably the biggest challenge in a raising rate environment. And as far as rate predictions, man, if I was good at that, I'd be really rich. And there's a lot of really rich people who think they're good at it, and then things contradict. A perfect example: a week ago, Friday, not last Friday, the Friday before, everybody said rates are going to go down. The bond market went down dramatically. Rates are going to go down. They went up 0.75 of a point in one day. And I haven't seen that kind of volatility in way more than 10 years, not in a day. So an important piece, mortgage rates are directly tied to the 10-year bond, but it's not always a guarantee of what's going to happen, especially right now. Just because the bond market goes down doesn't mean it's going to be a direct reflection on interest rates. That's typically built in. I mean, all these people, we have huge departments in any mortgage company that do nothing but watch hedges and in the markets. That's usually built in ahead of time. If there was a rate increase last week, we knew about it, a couple months earlier. But I really can't say, Laura. I would be scared to death to do that because every time I predict, or any one of us predicts, we're contradicted. And it's the number one question we get as lenders, number one. And it's been real hard to say the last 9 months.
Did you seriously forget your crystal ball today?
Yes,
I was really
I want one.
you to bring
Can
that
I
today.
have it? I need it personally too.
Exactly. Don't we all?
Yes.
So over the past few years, we have seen a lot of buyers actually purchase homes with cash. Now, sometimes that means that they did have, a few $100,000 sitting in the bank, but many of those cash transactions were people that are, 50 and above who had a great amount of equity in their homes, and they're taking that equity and they're using that for purchasing their next home. Now, we do this for two reasons. One, because there's limited number of homes on the market, it's very scary for a seller, or even as a realtor, for me to help a seller sell their home if they don't already know where they're going. Depending on, how particular that person might be, if they're looking for something particular, I certainly don't want to get them out of their home before we've found what they want. So it's really important to be knowledgeable about the tools that allow you to purchase before selling your home, the different things where we can use that equity, or a combination of getting a mortgage and then re-amortizing it. So I just Jenny is very knowledgeable on the different programs out there that exist, even though they do vary among lenders, and just kind of speak to what those might look like.
Yeah, I think there's two aspects I'd like to talk about with that, Laura. The first part is, over the last 3 years, seeing an unbelievable amount of cash transactions. If you're going to sell your house and you had 30 offers last year, or you have 3 offers right now, we saw so many, people paying cash. Horrible for me. It's really bad, but that's the reality of getting an offer accepted. It's really attractive as a seller, right? No appraisal, quick close. So we get it, and we know why it's attractive. And I'll be honest, we did that for our daughter, because she wanted this house more than anything, and it was the 30 offer environment. It was the only way she was going to get it, and so guilty. She got a mortgage right away, I promise. But the second piece, as far as a bridge loan, is what you're talking about. It's a hugely common question, especially the last 3 years, when everybody needs to write a non-contingent offer. And it's kind of like it sounds. It bridges the current equity over to the new home. It's basically a temporary loan. If you have a $200,000 house and you have $200,000 of equity, they will let you bridge up to 80% of that value. Whether you take $20,000 or you take the full 80% of that, it's up to you. It allows you to write the non-contingent offer, and it's just a temporary loan that sits there. Laura's right, each lender is very specific. I've worked for quite a few lenders in 25 years. My particular bridge at Treadstone, you have to pay it back within 90 days. It's quick, we get the funds fast, it's your down payment, or it's a big, huge down payment, whatever you want to do, but you got to pay it off pretty quick. Not a lot of fees, it's like a $500 fee, but then there's, you pay very little interest on those. There's other institutions that will, they don't demand that you pay them off. They work, has anybody in here ever had a HELOC or a home equity line of credit? Okay, it's pretty much the same thing. It's tapping into the equity. It's the same exact theory, and you just bridge it temporarily. An important note: say that you did have a small mortgage or a mortgage on your house, and you were going to get the bridge. There's a really important piece to that. You have to qualify for a bridge loan. It's just like everything else we do. It's numbers. It's calculating. So say you had a mortgage and you were going to get a bridge. You have to qualify on the existing mortgage, including taxes and insurance, the proposed payment on the bridge, which is usually amortized over like 15 years, and the proposed house with taxes and insurance. So for those of us on fixed income, you're not necessarily going to qualify. It's a very specific calculation, and you would need someone who's well-versed in that to know if you qualify.
Awesome. Okay. So going along with that, many of you who are in the audience that might have the ability to purchase your next home, condo, or wherever you're going with cash, sometimes that doesn't necessarily make the most sense. So if you could speak to some of the reasons that a client might want to use a mortgage, even if they had the ability to essentially write a check. What are some of the other factors to be considered?
Yeah, I think that especially the last couple of years, this was a really important conversation. My husband, who's also a loan officer, has a business degree, and he's really well versed in talking about your overall assets. I'll give you a personal example, Laura. I was in a position, bought my house a long time ago. I was in a position to pay off my mortgage. It sounded so great. I'm like, I am paying this thing off. 51 years old, free and clear. I'm so proud of myself. But when the rates were really low, I did a 15-year at 2.25%, and I invested all that money in my in the market. So I threw a big wad of cash and made over 6.5% while I was paying 2.25% on my mortgage. So I would be crazy to pay that off. Like, you should see my mortgage interest statement. It's so tiny, it's lovely. So that's a perfect example, because lots of times investments are gonna pay higher than what going interest rates are. Now, if you've got accounts that are paying over current 6%, great, but it's, as the interest rates in mortgages go higher, it makes less sense. In other words, is there stuff out there paying more? But you certainly can use your home's equity and invest in it, for sure, and would recommend you do that.
And what about some of simply the convenience factors?
Sure. Yeah, like a lot. I mean, anybody here know what having an escrow account is? Okay, so for those of us who had mortgages, typically our annual homeowners insurance and our annual property taxes can be part of that home mortgage payment. So say my loan is just $1,200 and then my escrow is $400. I never have to pay a tax bill. I never have to worry about my homeowner's insurance. In over 25 years of lending, I would easily say 98% of my clients want escrow. Whether they're millionaires or, make $30,000 a year, people love escrow. Now, escrows can get screwed up. Lenders are really good at messing up escrows, but it's kind of things that are outside of their control. Property taxes increase, townships can do weird things with tax bills, but the convenience of a mortgage and an escrow account, almost everybody loves to escrow.
I'm just going to throw in a personal story, because many of you guys might be at the point in your lives where you have or are paying off homes. Don't forget about your homeowner's insurance. I just got a letter within the last 2 weeks. My husband and I had been fortunate enough to pay off our home this year. Same thing, super excited. And I just got a letter that said, your homeowner's insurance has been canceled. Oops, I forgot that they're no longer sending the bill to the mortgage company, and so I had to call yesterday and reinstate our homeowner's insurance. I'm like, well, good thing it didn't burn down, because, I didn't even know about it. So just stuff to keep in mind. It's certainly very easy when that's all escrowed and we don't have to think about it. So this question is not likely going to affect many of the people in this room, but I feel like since so many of us have children, grandchildren that are in the process of building credit and starting to buy homes, I think it's worth mentioning. So can you talk about that idea of the huge effect that a person's credit score has on both their interest rates, and how a low credit score can even keep a client from many of the loan products that are available to those with better credit, and even the ability to take the current interest rate and buy it down?
Yeah, great questions, Laura. So a lot of younger people don't understand the importance of credit. My children know it very well. They all have 700 credit scores. But it's really important to talk about that with kids at a young age. All 4 of my children had credit cards. They were authorized on a credit card of mine by the time they were 16 or 17. So by the time they were all of them 18, they had credit scores. And of course, teaching the importance of paying bills on time. And just, what is a lender looking for? People who pay their bills on time, which equates to high credit scores. So kind of the highest credit score in the mortgage world is 740. The minute you're at 740 or higher, older people, our age, people who have had mortgages, we can be in the high 800s. Technically, there's 900. I've never seen one. It's like really rare to even see an 850, 800s in general. But anything over 740, you're going to get the best rate out there. The advantages of having high credit is you can have whatever product you want. First-time home buyer, sure, you can have the 3% down. Repeat buyer, you're going to get the lowest interest rate. Those with lower credit scores, generally speaking, under 680, you're going to qualify more for what we call the govies, or the government loans. Those are going to be more expensive. Even though they're going to have decent interest rates, they're not going to be dramatically different than something we call conventional financing. But the governments are going to limit your ability to win an offer with a home. It's not as desirable from the seller's perspective. You're going to pay things like funding fees or one-time mortgage. They're expensive. So in an ideal world, I always tell my first-time home buyers this. In the perfect mortgage world, you have a 740 credit score and you can put 20% down. Well, that's not everybody's case, especially first-time home buyers. So just stressing paying your bills on time, trying to achieve that 740, lower 700s is still good. They're going to have every product available, and it is the absolute most important piece of buying a home.
Great. And then in terms of us as we work with our maybe children and grandchildren, can you recommend ways that we might be able to help the young people in our life to build strong credit and even do credit repair if they've had some challenges, especially in the last few years? We've had just so much craziness with COVID and things like that.
I'd say the biggest piece to that is, again, someone that you trust who's a seasoned lender. Now, I'm sure not only are you getting hounded to sell your house, I'm sure you're getting hounded by lenders, this kind of gross market, all this marketing that's emerged after COVID. I think I do a lot of credit repair with my clients, and it really is a matter of pulling a credit report and really scrubbing and fine-tooth combing what's gone wrong. Oh, look at, you had an old medical collection from last year and it's bringing your score down. One of the most important things I tell people, and people don't understand this, do not utilize more than 30% of a revolving credit card line. That is really hard on your credit score. If you have a $1,000 maximum credit line, don't hold a balance over $300. Better yet, pay it off every month so that you don't have interest. Let's teach them that part too. So really pulling a person's credit report apart line by line. Here's the creditor to call, here's your account number. So I do a lot of that regardless of first-time home buyer or not. And a lot of, any of your online lenders or someone that you just called, they're not gonna take that time. They're gonna move on to the next borrower that qualifies. So finding someone that you really trust that cares about your grandchildren, that cares about your children, and will take that time. Because a lot of loan offers don't care or take that time.
This isn't on here, but just how do people go about pulling their own credit score, and should they be doing that on a regular basis?
Yeah, I always tell my clients, the silly things like Credit Karma, any one of those apps for your phone, but almost any of the credit cards offer a free credit reporting service. Like I personally look at mine through my Costco card. It's always free. I like Equifax.com, so whether it was on your computer or on your phone, I think that one's free. I like that one. Just be aware that anytime you're looking at any of those services, whether it's your credit card or you have Credit Karma, those aren't necessarily going to be reflective of a mortgage credit report. In the mortgage business, we pull all three repositories, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. And that is a hard pull. I get that question. Well, I don't want a hard pull. Well, then you don't want a mortgage because we got to do a hard pull. And that's going to be like bare bones who you are. It's not an automobile score. It's not a credit card score. It's a mortgage score. So if you have Equifax on your phone and it says you're 789, it doesn't guarantee that you're 789 with me.
Can you just speak to what's the difference between a hard credit pull and a soft pull?
It affects your score. It's so if you have, let's say you have three scores, a 789, a 742, and a 750. 750 is how we're going to score your mortgage, the middle score. If I go out and pull mortgage, it's going to probably drop that just a little bit. Versus an auto loan is only going to pull one repository. Different banks pick the one, like my credit union uses Experian to look at my automobile score. Well, that's not touching the other two repositories, so that would be a soft pull. Like the advertisements you see, if the credit card says doesn't affect your score, that's a soft pull. But a mortgage is a hard pull, and it's potentially going to bring you down some points.
Gotcha. But isn't there a case where if let's say you're shopping for a mortgage, if you've had a hard pull from one lender, can you get another hard pull from another lender within a certain period of time and not have it affect your score?
Yep, that's some legislation that changed a couple years ago, and you'll get different answers from different lenders. Typically, that's a 30-day window. So that was part of those consumer protection laws where, if you've got one lender quoting you 7.5% and you've got one lender quoting you 6.5%, and then it hurts your credit every time, you have a 30-day window where you can shop lenders and not have it hurt your score.
Perfect. Awesome. You bet. And in fact, so Angela's going to be first. We are now going to open up the floor for questions. We've got about 20 minutes. So I'm going to do a handful of questions until about 5:25 after, and then I will do the drawing and get you guys out of here on time. So, Angela.
So with the new changes with the medical histories of like late pays, whatever, with medical bills, how much do those factors affect someone trying to get a mortgage?
Okay, the question is, if I have medical collections on my credit report, how does that affect me getting a mortgage? We haven't seen a lot of changes yet in the credit reporting world for medical. Medical's not supposed to count anymore. I think that we will see that, but as of right now, if you have open medical collections, it does hurt your score. It does bring your score down. I don't know when that exactly is going to change, and let's hope it's soon, but generally speaking, it can bring your score down quite a bit. And non-medical collections are really hard on a credit score. If you've got cell phone collections or utility bill collections, that you could lose 100 points from one collection with Verizon. You could go from a 700 to a 600 just from one big non-medical collection. And in general, medicals don't hurt you as much. As an example, FHA doesn't even require you pay them off. So there is, and that's always been true. So if you had, 1,000 or 2,000 in medical collections, FHA will say, oh, you don't have to pay them off. So, yeah, good question.
Okay.
How does the township assessment compare to the value of the home?
Okay, how does the township assessment compare to the value of the home? That's a great question. Blaine, do you want to address that one?
Yeah, the assessments can be all over the place because whether or not you've sold your home recently, they do what's called uncapping, and then they reassess at the new sale price and whatnot. There used to be, the rule of thumb was your assessment was 50% of the value of the house. But that's only when markets are stable, interest rates are stable, buyers and sellers are all doing the same thing, and we haven't seen a stable market in a long, long time. So it's really tough. You could probably still be reasonably accurate of looking at your assessed value. There's three values that you see in the assessing department. You have the assessed value, the SEV, which is the state equalized value, and then a taxable value. And I couldn't tell you exactly, Tom maybe can, exactly how all those are different or how they're affected. But you could probably still reasonably guess anyway that doubling your assessed value gets you into the ballpark. It's just not an accurate rule of thumb. Yeah, it's a big ballpark.
Elaborate.
So when we're talking about the three numbers on there, right? The SEV, that's kind of what your home is maybe sort of worth. It puts you in the ballpark, but the taxable value is the number you actually pay taxes on. And he mentioned capped and uncapped, right? So the state of Michigan says that the taxable value can only be raised 5% a year. So that's why on your tax bill you see the SEV being so much higher these days than your taxable value. That's a good thing. That means your home's worth more than the taxes you're paying on it. And that does become uncapped when you sell the home, okay? So if you sell your home, the new owner is going to have to pay taxes on the true market value of the home, whatever is paid. Now, there are instances where you can sell your home to a family member. The law is very specific which family members can buy your home and keep it capped. So, for example, a grandson, granddaughter, they can actually buy a home from you, and their tax rate is based on whatever you're paying instead of the true market value of the home. So that's kind of a really, really cool thing.
It is. It's a huge, especially a huge thing, and just kind of a caveat. You will see right now homes that might be identical right next to each other, and one might be paying, the taxes could be absolutely double, simply because it has sold in the last few years and the other one has been in the family a longer time and has a lower taxable value. So
I have two questions. One is there a price range right now that is selling real well?
basically anything 300,000 and below is generally selling very, very quickly. That does change whether you're talking about a condo or a home. I would say single family homes, 300,000 and below, condos probably in that 250 and below, all day long. They're still on the market less than 7 days. Now, when we get into some of those larger price points, then they definitely have some longer days on market depending on, are we talking 500,000, 600,000? How specific is that home? All those things affect that.
And my other question deals with the mortgage or appraisal. Does a mortgage appraisal differ from an appraisal that you'd have a person come and do in your home?
Great question. Very common question as well. So when she says a mortgage appraisal too, we need to distinguish between the two types of mortgages. A refinance of your house where there's no buyer involved, and then a purchase. The biggest difference with the purchase mortgage appraisal is that we have one extra market participant in the transaction, and that's the buyer of the house. Because then we have a purchase agreement where we have a buyer and a seller agreeing on a market price for them. And so then an appraiser has a little bit more information to go into the market and see what other similar buyers are paying for similar homes. But the process is exactly the same. Yeah. The values, the market values could be different between, say, a refinance or an estate appraisal than when we have a buyer involved. And it simply is because that buyer has said, we think it's worth X. Seller has said, we think it's worth Y. And then now the appraiser can go into the market and see, is that a supportable price? That make sense?
Yeah, it is a little bit different. And one thing that you'll see in this market that we've seen more and more of is something called an appraisal gap guarantee. Have any of you guys heard of that? Okay. So what Blaine was referring to is when, let's say you've got a home, and it's been very common occurrence in the last few years to say a home has been listed at $280,000, okay? It's on the market for 5 days. The listing agent sets what we call a purchase deadline or an offer deadline. We give buyers maybe 5 days to tour that home. We plan the fact that we're going to have multiple offers. We set a deadline for those offers to come in. Let's say we maybe have 6 offers that come in that home. Buyers know that there's going to be competing offers, and that drives the price up. So our original list price might have been $280. You're going to have buyers that this buyer might say, well, I'm going to pay $290. You might have another buyer that says, I'm going to pay $300,000, and I'm going to add in to my purchase agreement what's called a $10,000 appraisal gap guarantee, meaning that if the appraiser comes in and says, you know what, you may be willing to pay $300,000 for that home, but it's not worth $300,000. It's really only worth $290. That means that buyer will bring that additional $10,000 to their lender if the home doesn't appraise. It's, the price of a house can be very, very subjective. At the end of the day, if you're going to live in a house for a lot of years and you're willing to pay a certain price for that, that's totally fine, but it goes back to a lender being comfortable with the value of the house compared to the loan that the buyer is getting. And that's where those appraisal gaps come into play, because a lender is still only going to loan based on what they feel the home is worth, and that approval of, a buyer with an 80% mortgage or something.
Yeah, Laura, it's always the lesser of the appraised value or sales price. Always.
That's when we like to rumble, right? All three of us. The lender gets involved. We're all mad at the appraiser. And if you have a good realtor that's advocating on your behalf, we do get to rumble. It's kind of fun sometimes.
They're almost always mad at the appraiser, by the way.
It's always his fault.
Yeah, and by the way, an important note in this current market, in say the last 10 years, where sellers have ruled the market because there are so many buyers compared to the amount of houses for sale. And as I talked on my portion, market value, which is all an appraiser is opining or developing an opinion on, is market value. And we said the most probable price in a competitive and open market. An appraiser will never tell you what you can sell it for, what a buyer will pay for. In a highly competitive market where, like Laura said, you have multiple buyers competing, that is referred to as auction value, not market value. So important to know the difference. Again, the appraiser doesn't tell you what you can sell it for. You can sell it for $100,000 more than what the rest of the buyers are willing to pay. That's auction value, and that one buyer won the auction. But it's not necessarily the definition of market value.
Exactly. Yeah, because at the end of the day, if somebody's willing to pay it and they have enough of a down payment to cover any gap in the appraisal value, that's very powerful to a seller when we are, comparing offers. That's one of the very specific things, because we don't want to ever get to a situation where we've got this buyer that said they would pay $300,000 and all of a sudden the appraisal comes in low and that buyer does not have the additional money for the down payment. That transaction is likely going to fall apart. And so all of these things, and that also speaks back to going back and working with an agent and a lender who understands all these finer nuances of the things that are going on in the market and how to navigate those with a specific strategy, and simply talk to you if you were to be a seller and explain what that looks like. It's important that sellers understand that up front, not while they're in the middle of a transaction that might be falling apart. So, okay, back there.
This is for Blaine, and I'd like to know how much an appraisal costs and how long is that good for? Is it good for a year or that day?
Yeah, great question. Typical appraisal costs usually between $300 and $600, depending on the size of the house and the complexity and all that. I would say most of them $400 to $500. Great question on the how long is it good for? Really depends on the market. What is the market doing? For the last couple years, yeah, the appraisal was pretty much good for that day, because every house tomorrow is selling higher than the last, every comparable sale that we used was the highest sale since yesterday, and it just kept going up. Now, you can have appraisals updated. We will often have lenders reach out to us, say 3 or 4 months after an appraisal is done, and say, hey, can you do an update on this appraisal? We just go look in the market, see what the comparable sales today would be, and we say, okay, it's gone up 6% in the last 6 months or something. So, yeah, great question.
Okay, back there.
Do I understand that if you pull a credit score, it changes the credit score just by the mere fact that you pulled it?
Yeah. Yeah, a hard pull will tend to bring you down, each of their scores down a little bit. Yeah. I mean, if you have an 800 credit score, oh, ouch, now I'm 788. It's not a big deal. When it can be a really big deal is with a borrower with lower credit scores, and I've had many deals where it was the difference between an approval and not approving. As an example, I have a 640 credit score. Okay, we can do FHA on a 640. Credit is good for 120 days in lending, or 4 months, as are appraisals in lending for 120 days. So I pull that client 120 days later, and just that credit pull potentially could bring them down just enough to where they don't qualify. Higher score people, it doesn't hurt. Again, if you're over 740, you're over 740. If you've had mortgages, you're typically there. But people with limited credit, it can be detrimental.
I hate the fact that it's so easy to get credit, and yet when you use a third or more of that credit, it is detrimental to your score. That's something I really didn't realize until
that's
getting
the number
closer
one
to Jenny.
thing that people don't understand, and I understand why you don't understand it. Utilization of credit is a huge factor in scoring, and people don't know it, and they run their credit cards up and just use them all the time, and I can't get my score over 680. Well, you're using $17,000 or $18,000 credit all the time. We don't like that. Lenders don't like that. We don't see that as responsible.
They call
Jenny,
it Congress.
Personally.
Do you know how quickly the score bounces back if there are no changes after the hard pull?
There's the crystal ball question again. There is no rhyme or reason. Just like what you do with the unbelievable amount of detail and layers in your comparable sales, credit reporting agencies they're what's the word we used? The algorithm is really confusing and intricate. And I've seen everything, from, it could go up 80 points in a week to I lost 100 points in a day. So it's a really complex scoring model, and it's gotten more and more complex since COVID.
You spoke of escrow account.
Yeah.
And the high percentage of people that actually use that.
Yeah.
I assume for the convenience of it.
Exactly.
Money obviously has to be taken out ahead so you can pay the bills. Is there a formula that says
Yeah.
how much time ahead and
Yeah.
what pool of money you have to do that?
Absolutely. There's an exact formula to that. It's very specific. It's called, it's basically whatever month you close. So taxes typically in West Michigan are due in July and December. So if you ever close on a home in June or you close on a home in November, we're going to need a lot of what's called prepaids. And people often confuse closing costs with prepaids. And when you want you're going to have costs on a mortgage, of course, they're expensive. But prepaids are not costs. It's us collecting a pool of money to put into your new escrow account to ensure that those taxes are paid by twice a year, and then your homeowners. So absolutely, it's based on the time of year that you close. If I close in June, I'm going to need, we always have 2 months of cushion in escrows as well, homeowners and taxes. So if I close in June, guess what? You've got a tax bill due the very next month. We're going to want at least 14 months of the tax bill in reserves. Yep. You close in January, you don't have, December was just paid by the seller, you don't have a bill for a while. We're not going to have near as much prepaids in the beginning of the year as we are around tax time. Good question.
Got one last question.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about when to update, because it seems, I live in a condo, and it seems when one condo sells, the person who comes in, they tear everything out and they rebuild. So when is it worth updating them before you sell?
Yep, that's a great question. And that would be one of those things that it truly is very specific. And number one, when I'm meeting with a seller, I say the important thing is for you to be comfortable in your own home. And then depending on how soon you might be selling, if you're only updating to sell, then we really have to look at the fact of, does it make sense to do those updates? Are you likely going to do two things? One, get majority of the money that you've fronted for those updates. Are you going to get that back in the sale? Yes or no? A lot of times you will. Sometimes you won't. But it's also going to make it much easier to sell. Because of this whole HGTV revolution, so to speak, I will tell you that there tends to be more buyers looking for that beautiful HGTV move-in ready home than those who are willing to roll up their sleeves and fix the home themselves. So when it comes to that, I just always meet with people and we really go over the pros and cons of that and then help you to make that decision. And at the end of the day, it's a very personal decision based on your end financial goals. And often I tell people, hey, if you're going to do those updates, do them now. Do them now while you can live here and enjoy them for a little while, even if you're going to move in 5 years, and then it'll still be, fresh and clean and ready to sell at that time. So, yep, no magic, perfect answer on that one. So,
Can I add to that?
you bet.
That is exactly the answer that I was going to say, in exactly the same way. So, good job, Laura.
Thank you. Yeah, it just goes back to, they're all great questions. They're all very specific. They're all very personal. And any of us, depending on what area you're really looking at, can sit down with you, discuss your very personal situation, your personal goals, and how the different choices that you have would lead you closer or farther away from those goals, and let you make the decision. And that's the secret sauce of this whole thing, is you guys getting smarter and being able to make those decisions. All right, Don, I'm going to let you one last question.
It's just the tickets in the bowl, mix them up.
Okay.
Last month the winners were on top.
Oh, no way.
We were off by 50 points.
Oh, man. Okay. All right, we're mixing. I promise. Hold on, here. All right.